What's going on, everyone? Welcome to a Monday edition of On Q. Rich Quinones here. Don't forget to check us out on the YouTube channel, Rich Q on Q. Follow us on all social media platforms as well, at Rich Q on Q, X, and on IG, and of course, Spotify, Apple, Buzzsprout for the pod. Big game tonight, Monday Night Football in the NFL to close out, bookend, if you will, week 11, and to break it down a little bit between Philadelphia Eagles and Kansas City Chiefs. Rematch of last year's Super Bowl. Our NFL insider, Lloyd Vance, host of Lloyd Vance's Insider Football. 102.9 The Game, part of the Broad Street South Network at Lloyd Vance. And oh my goodness. So another weekend in the books. We'll cap it off tonight. This is a good game on paper. 8-1 Philadelphia, 7-2 Kansas City. First and foremost, do you put any stock in that the Eagles are saying themselves, revenge game, here we go, after what transpired last year in the Super Bowl?
Well, Q, it's the Andy Reid Bowl. A lot of common connections between these teams, and we talked about a lot of this leading into last year's Super Bowl 57. That Andy Reid with his familiarity with the team, and then there's some people on the Eagles staff that have came over from the Chiefs side of things. So you have Reid, you have Matt Nagy, all those guys are former Eagles guys. So yeah, there's a lot of anticipation for this game. I'll put it that way, and the Eagles cannot, I've listened all week to them where they were saying, "Oh, it's just another game." We're trying to not make it a big revenge thing, but they definitely have this in mind for Super Bowl 57, where they lost 38-35, very close game, came down and Kansas City wins by a field goal. I was just looking at all the stats and everything from that game. I won't get all into all the numbers ad nauseum, but it was very evenly matched, and we know the turnover battle was the key in this game, where Jalen Hurts had that huge fumble and the scoop score. So I think tonight it's definitely going to come into play. Now, obviously, everybody's talking about, and this is one of the things I researched, Q. Andy Reid is 30-6 after a bye.
Yep.
That's including the postseason. So this is an opportunity for him at home at Arrowhead. We just saw this past weekend where home teams were, so far they're 11-2. So that just shows you the home field advantage. And it's going to be a fun game to watch. I expect the Eagles to try to come in there on all cylinders. Obviously, they'll want to stop Travis Kelce and keep Mahomes contained.
We talk about the offense of Kansas City because we know it has so many weapons, whether it's Kelce, Pacheco, Patrick Mahomes moving around, doing what he does best. I think the weather might be a factor tonight. They're calling for cold rain. So again, it could be one of these low scoring affairs. I don't know that's going to be the case, but you mentioned Andy Reid coming off that bye, big win against Miami and Germany. Obviously, Philly coming into this game, 3-game winning streak. Nice win over Dallas, sloppy type of game, but they came from behind as always. The Eagles typically will score first. 18 out of 22 games, they've scored first in that first quarter, right? First drive, first possession, kind of set the tone. Kansas City's defense, though, I think it's kind of an untold story because they've got a bunch of defensive ends, whether it's Jones, whether it's the other kid, they can get to the quarterback. You look at Cook, you look at Watson, they've got some really good players in the secondary. Do you think the matchup, we always talk about in the trenches, do you see a scenario where Kansas City's defense will be the path to victory tonight against the Philadelphia Eagles?
Definitely, and we talk about those ties as commonality. You have Steve Spagnuolo, who coached with the Giants, and he also was on the Eagles staff many years ago. When I covered the team, he was the linebackers coach, and he's a guy that understands the Eagles scheme kind of inside and out, and he knows first and foremost he's got to get to Hurts. He's got to put some pressure on him, and you made a key point talking about the defensive line of the Kansas City Chiefs. Carl Laftis has 6 sacks. But we know Chris Jones in the middle. He just got that big contract, is the pocket crusher, and he's going to be going up against Kelce. So that's one of the marquee matchups that you want to look at. And I'm not sure if Bolton's going to play in this game. Their linebacker who had the scoop score in the Super Bowl, he had an injury to his wrist, and I'm not sure he's going to be out there. But first and foremost, they got to contain A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. They had huge games in the Super Bowl against this Chiefs secondary, and McDuffie, the young corner, is going to try to shadow one of them.
Yeah, and you might also have, again, as you mentioned, the shadow, the roamer. I also think one of the keys to this game is Patrick Mahomes, for as great as he is, and when he improvises and when he tries to be that magician and pull the rabbit out of the hat, sometimes he does a little too much. Sometimes he might force the issue. I don't call it cockiness or arrogance, but it's borderline right there, thinking I can make every throw, right? I equate the Chiefs to the NBA version of Golden State. The Splash Brothers, when they were winning championships left and right, they can be down 15 points and they start shooting themselves back in the game. But then again, there's a point of the game where maybe they're taking that ill-advised three-pointer just to take it. Sometimes Mahomes will try to make that ill-advised throw or pass, and sometimes it bites him in the butt. We saw it against Tampa Bay a couple years ago in the Super Bowl where they harassed him and he turned the ball over twice, didn't even crack about 250 yards in that one, in a loss, mind you. So I guess the question is, when you look at the Philadelphia Eagles, let's just say the secondary is not doing what they need to do. How much reliant and how much confidence do you have in, say, their pass rush, that front four, in the trenches to kind of get to Mahomes? Because they're so deep. I mean, they can rotate guys in and out. It doesn't matter who it is. We know about the defensive line. We know about their ability to get to the quarterback. I mean, you can go through the litany. It doesn't matter. It can be the young players like Carter. It could, then you look at the veteran guys like Graham or Cox. I mean, Reddick, who's been showing up of late. So how do you see that affecting Kansas City's offensive game plan?
Yeah, that's a good call there, and they have Trey Smith in that line. He's a Pro Bowl offensive guard, and they have a very good center on the Chiefs line. But they're going to have to first and foremost figure out the matchups along that line, call out everything. I think Mahomes will try to get the ball out of his hands very quickly.
Yep.
We know the Eagles secondary. They're ranked pretty low. I think they're in the bottom five in terms of passing yards allowed. Um, he's going to get the ball out of his hands quickly to Kelsey and the rest of those guys over the middle against this Eagles defense, where you have two linebackers that are more thumpers. Kevin Byard has played pretty well, though, in the past against the Chiefs. The last time, obviously, was still in Tennessee, and he had a lot of tackles in that game, like 12 tackles, and Tennessee played very well. So, the Eagles are going to try to get that pressure to talk about 70 sacks last year. And first and foremost, they got to get the heat on Mahomes. Mahomes only been sacked, Hugo, 12 times this season. So he hasn't been sacked a lot, gets the ball out of his hands, but he has uncharacteristically, he has 17 touchdowns, but he has 8 interceptions so far. So he will turn the football over. And we saw that in that Denver game that they lost, where he
Yep.
turned the ball over and then they just couldn't get out of that hole. So I think the Eagles are not afraid of the other weapons on the Chiefs offense, particularly the receivers. We talked about MVS and
Yep.
Sky Moore. They cannot get to separation. Cole Hartman, who they brought back, has made some mistakes, had some drops. Now, Rice is a pretty good young receiver. We'll see if
Yep.
he's able to get the ball.
I also think the Eagles can't do what they did against Washington and Dallas, and that's come out of the gate slow. They just can't, because I think it's different 14-0, 14-3, 17-13 against Kansas City than, say, a Dallas or a Washington. I mean, they've got the horses to come back against those teams. And I think Dallas also, we know what transpired late in the game. Point being, I think Kansas City is a different animal. And, you look at the way the NFC is starting to fall into place. The Lions would have come from behind win. Minnesota with that winning streak snapped. I know we'll talk a little bit more about the weekend later on in the week. San Fran, again, back to their winning ways. Purdy's playing really well. I'm not going to sit here and say this is a must win for the Philadelphia Eagles. It's an out of conference game. I think they want to silence a lot of critics and shut a lot of people up. And sure, to the players, they've got that sour taste in their mouth from that Super Bowl loss. But there's no Super Bowl hangover because they won 8 out of their first 9 games. I mean, typically when you lose, it's hard to get back and kind of have a down year. But the road is paved right there for the NFC. They might have to watch those 2 teams that I mentioned. And then, of course, you got to incorporate Dallas into the mix. But I say that to say this. Kansas City, I'm still trying to figure out, I still don't know what the Eagles are, right? We want that complete game, but I'm also still trying to find out what Kansas City is about. And I think Kansas City tonight really wants to go out, and I believe they really want to put together a peak performance, because we've seen over the years when they lose a game, it can just manifest itself into 2 or 3, and then they eventually go on a run. I want to see this team kind of peaking again, if that makes sense. So I believe this is a game where you will see Mahomes, if he has to take over, play smart football, mind you. But I just foresee a game tonight where he might get his, drop back to pass 35 times, 28 of 35, 278, 3 touchdowns, and a scrambling touchdown late. I mean, to me, weather aside, this has Mahomes written all over it. He just needs to play smart football. Do you believe there's more pressure on Kansas City to get the win, dominating performance, or even a close, good game? Or is there more pressure on the Philadelphia Eagles?
Well, that's a good one, Q, because we know that the Chiefs, they're trying to hang with the Ravens. The Ravens are trying to get that top spot over in
Yep.
the AFC, and you're right about the Eagles. This is the beginning of a very tough stretch that we've talked about. They got the Kansas City, then they're going to have Buffalo, then they got the Niners, then they're back at Dallas again, and then at Seattle. So, this is a game the Eagles obviously they want to have because Detroit. I know we'll talk later about those games, but Detroit surprisingly pulled that game out, and they're looking like they're ready to fight for that #1 seed as well. The Niners are getting right. So you're correct in that this is a desperation bowl for both teams, and it may be that over my dead body type of game for both quarterbacks because Jalen Hurts, he wants to prove that he's not just a runner. In the Super Bowl, he ran for 3 touchdowns against the Chiefs, but he wants to prove that he can beat teams from the pocket and it's going to be interesting to see these guys lock horns. I was looking at the pass defense stats are pretty bad for the Chiefs as well. They allow a lot of yards as well. So, I do expect a lot of passing. Hopefully the weather, as you had, cooperates. There's been raining kind of off and on today in Kansas City. So hopefully the weather cooperate and they'll be able to throw the football. Obviously the Chiefs and the Eagles, they're both going to want to establish the ground game because if you remember in the Super Bowl, Pacheco had a very nice game, over 70 yards rushing and kind of controlled the pace of the game. The Eagles, it's surprising the last couple of weeks they've kind of gotten away from running the football as dominant they were early in the season. So two very good offensive lines, very evenly matched. And Kansas City's -4 in turnover ratio. The Eagles are -2. So they both will turn the football over in circumstances this season, not like last year where they were protecting the ball. But I expect a close game. And it's going to be interesting to see these two quarterbacks.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, Hurts, we know he's not 100%, but again, he still put up really nice numbers this year, albeit a couple more picks than you would like, 15 touchdowns, 8 picks. But you mentioned that ground game. And again, if he's limited to mobility, the RPOs, the scrambling, it's got to fall on DeAndre Swift. And you're right. I mean, you look at the last, to me, he had one game this year where he's carried the ball, over 25 times. That was against Minnesota. He's averaging 16. I mean, I think if anything tonight could potentially be a 20-25 type of carry night for Swift.
If they're smart, they want to establish him, and that'll give the play action that Hurts so dearly likes when he gets the football down the field to AJ Brown, and we know they went over the top in the Super Bowl with AJ Brown. Now, of course, a big key, and I'm going to be watching this right away, is Dallas Goedert. How did they replace him? He's not going to be able to play, obviously, with that broken arm, and they're going to try to replace him with Alberto and a couple of the other tight ends on their roster, and they have to find ways to attack that middle of the field because, as I said, Bolton's probably not going to play for the Chiefs. So, interesting and for Hurts and with that leg and the knee injury, you wonder they're saying it's a bone bruise, but I know he's put a sleeve on it over and over again, and they're going to need him to be dynamic and take the ball away from Swift at certain occasions. And Swift, as you said, he's going to have to get behind Kelsey in that big offensive line and do some damage. So it's going to be a time of possession, and you don't want Mahomes to have the ball last. You saw that in the Super Bowl.
What do you like tonight?
Q, I'm going to go with Kansas City in a very close game. I may say like 27-23. I think it's going to be a situation where the Arrowhead crowd will get into it. As you said, even if they are playing with a deficit, the Chiefs still have that confidence. Now, these young receivers have got to step up for them, though. If Mahomes has guys dropping the ball and he's getting frustrated, that could be a huge factor in this. And then we talked about the pass rush. Brandon Graham and all the guys, Fletcher Cox up front, they got to get some heat on Mahomes, and that could kind of turn it. But I think it's the Chiefs in a close game. And I usually don't talk about it, but both kickers are very good in this one, too.
Good point. Good point. Could come down to that field goal opportunity. I tend to agree with you. I think the Chiefs win this one, a close game. And then you look at the Eagles' schedule going forward, which again, we'll highlight a little more later in the week. It's a Monday edition of On Cue. Rich Quinones here. Lloyd Vance, host of Lloyd Vance's Insider Football. 1029 The Game online. Of course, Broad Street South, kind enough to join us. All right. About an hour ago, the big news, I don't really think it's shocking. Multiple sources are saying the Jets are going to bench Zach Wilson, Tim Boyle to start at quarterback. I think this is a move. I go back to March when I said on BYP, I thought it would be a mistake to go after Aaron Rodgers. I thought they should have cut Zach Wilson, figure out a way to keep Mike White, and then maybe get that journeyman. I mean, hell, even during the season, you probably could have gotten a kid like Josh Dobbs, albeit didn't have the greatest performance last night. I thought he played well for Minnesota. That saw their 5-game winning streak snapped against Denver on Sunday Night Football. But with all that being said, I think it reeks of a desperation move. Aaron Rodgers is not coming back. There's no incentive now for Aaron Rodgers to come back. Aaron Rodgers is going to look like a fool if he keeps saying, I'm going to come back, and he has a setback and doesn't come back. It's a major tease. They're not a playoff team. They're not worthy of the playoffs. They don't deserve to go to the playoffs. The offense has just 100% let the defense down. And the defense that everyone was clamoring was 85 Esh, 78 Steelers, 85 Bears, 86 Giants, 2,000 Ravens. They've spit the bit as well. So, and then let's not even talk about yesterday losing the game, mind you, and then the post-game nonsense. I think Robert Salah is on borrowed time. I don't even think there's a reason to keep Zach Wilson on this roster, to be quite honest with you. This was a move that probably should have been made a couple weeks ago. There's no turning back. Zach Wilson's career with the Jets is done, but this could have all been avoided if they just tuned in and listened to me back in March. So right now, Boyle gets the nod. He'll get to start Friday, Black Friday game, mind you, against the Miami Dolphins.
You're cute in this situation where they put all their eggs in one basket. And that was Aaron Rodgers' basket. He gets hurt, 4 snaps into the season, and Wilson just was not ever the guy. And they reached for him. Reminds me a lot of Kyle Bowler type of guy coming out of college, and the Ravens took him very high, and they said, okay, this kid, he's got all the dynamics. You see the way he throws the football. From one knee, he could throw it into the goalpost, and they talked about Zach Wilson's workout at BYU and the high RPMs on his football. Well, when he gets in a game situation, he cannot read, and he overtrusts his arm. He throws the ball in harm's way over and over again. Lots of interceptions, but there's a ton of near interceptions as well, like we saw yesterday. And he just can't rally the troops, and you could see that his team members are not. They don't like him.
I mean, this team stinks.
Yeah, they're not happy with him. And Wilson, I know Garrett Wilson was going to the huddle yelling. Hey, they're probably couple times he was open and he was waving his arms.
And then we get on some of these players because they're trying to hit their incentives. They're trying to get their stats. We know the wide receivers are divas. We know about the running back. You have Cook missing assignments, missed tackling, blown assignments. Gardner, just it's a debacle. I mean, this team stinks. You go back to the game that they should have lost to the Giants. If the Giants would have let that kid throw the friggin' football, they've scored 13 points, 6 points, 12 points, 6 points. So we can talk about Zach, and at this point, I'm over it. The kid can't play in the NFL. He just can't. I don't want to hear this. Go in a different situation. Here you go. They drafted this kid number 2 overall. So why are we not, and we should be also hammering the GM, who should be on borrowed time as well, because you put all your eggs in one basket drafting this kid up a couple years ago. I think that's one of the reasons they didn't want to sit him, because of the way they drafted him.
They didn't want to wipe that egg off their face. And we talk about these bonus baby quarterbacks. And when a guy can't play, just admit it, move on. And Q, as you said, if they had a game manager type, an Alex Smith type of quarterback out there with that defense, they could probably have won a few more games and been in contention for the playoffs. And he's just not the guy. And as you said, yes, he'll get another opportunity because everybody always wants to give these first round guys another chance. Like look at Paxton Lynch. He bounced around the league and people gave him a couple other opportunities. Sam Bradford, a guy covered right here in Philadelphia. How many times he bounced around and everybody said, oh, he's just that great quarterback, and he just wasn't the same guy from college. And the NFL's hard. I think Wilson will get another chance, maybe, and then we'll see from there. But as you said, change of scenery, I just don't see it happen. And he's a guy that he has all the measurables and all that stuff, but he's just not getting it done in the league.
And he's a young kid. He's only 24, 25. And by the way, Bradford, I got friggin' tired of hearing all these clown jackasses talk about Sam Bradford, the best arm in football. Sam Bradford, Sam Bradford, if you really think about it, had a more distinguished career than Zach Wilson. I mean, he was NFL Rookie of the Year, even though he bounced around from the Rams to the Eagles to Minnesota to Arizona. I mean, he put up some numbers, but I got tired of, this is his year. And I remember when the Philadelphia Eagles drafted Carson Wentz. I remember you came on my radio show at the time, and I mentioned to you, I'm so tired of this nonsense with Bradford, because if he believes he's it, he shouldn't have to worry about looking over his shoulders. And I believe at the time that's exactly what they told him. I believe at the time that's exactly what Doug Peterson told him. If you play well, you won't have to look over your shoulder. Well, I also believe one of the reasons that Aaron Rodgers wanted this kid to hang around is because he realized he had no competition. Can you imagine if Aaron Rodgers goes down and they bring in Dobbs, and Dobbs plays well, and Dobbs a journeyman quarterback, right? But Aaron Rodgers is 39, going to be 40, coming off an ACL. See, the issue is they sold their soul, right, to the Aaron Rodgers devil. Because if you don't bring in Hackett, you don't trade for Rodgers. So now all of a sudden you're stuck with a bad offensive coordinator. You're stuck with a head coach who has no control over this team, who kept going to battle for a kid that it's so evident he cannot play at all. I mean, you can dissect it. He's not making the throws. He's not making the reads. He's not making the progressions. I mean, hell, you look at the kid, Tommy DeVito, yesterday, lights it up for the Giants, and he was sacked 9 times. Explain that to me. You've got quarterbacks making plays, and this kid can't make the play. So I don't know how the GM and the head coach survived this. And here's another thing. If you get rid of Zach Wilson and they want to draft a quarterback and Aaron Rodgers has a problem with it, take a walk, man, because this is where you're at with the Jets right now. You can't allow Aaron Rodgers, you can't placate him. You can't allow him to run this organization. That's why you have a GM. But yet, if you get rid of the GM and you get rid of the head coach, they're not going to be married to these players. I don't give a damn if your name is Aaron Rodgers. Like, the Jets are in a really bad spot right here.
And we always talk about these first round quarterbacks they're either a coach's savior or they're a killer. And
yeah,
I harken back to we talked about Matt Nagy earlier. He's now with the Chiefs, but he's with the Bears, and they put all their eggs in Mitchell Trubisky's basket. And this is our guy. We're going to draft him high 100%. And all that, and they're going to bring him out there, and he can play. Great workout at North Carolina. Well, guess what? He couldn't play in the National Football League, and he's a backup at best. Unfortunately, as you said, eventually the owners are like, hey, you told me this was your guy. Well, you hitched your wagon to him. That's it. And then to make it worse, the Jets bring in Aaron Rodgers' personal offensive coordinator, Nathaniel Hackett. And was he really teaching Zach Wilson in these sessions that weren't shown on Hard Knocks? Was he showing him how to be a good quarterback and all this stuff? It was all kumbaya. They thought that Rodgers would placate everything, but as you said, Q, 39, almost 40, it was a stretch. And then unfortunately he gets injured, and then you see this team kind of fall apart at the seams. So, ugly situation in New York. I know talk radio up there in the back pages are all talking about this situation, but why not give Tim Boyle a chance? Maybe he can be like Mike White that you were talking about, win some games, and this team could jump in the race maybe for that 7th spot. I don't see it happening, but yes, it was too late to pull the trigger. They should have did this earlier.
Yeah, show of hands if you had Timmy Boyle and Tommy DeVito starting games respectively for the Jets and Giants in late November. So he is Lloyd Vance, host of Lloyd Vance's Insider Football. 102.9 The Game, Broad Street South at Lloyd Vance. He's going to join me later in the week. We'll recap everything going on in the NFL and more news and notes. If there are any type of firings, or we know a lot of coaches on the hot seat, we'll dissect it a little more later in the week. But always appreciate you jumping on Q, pal, and we'll do it again soon.
Thanks for having me on.